This is part 2 in a series on William Marion Branham. In part 1, I talked about some of Branham's history and his claims to supernatural visitations. In this video, I will cover some of the organizations that are spreading Branham's message, his view of the Bible, and his authority. In part 1, I talked about how Branham died in a car crash, December 24th, 1965. 5 months earlier, he called together some of his leaders and said that he wanted to start the William Branham Evangelical Association. And this would be for the purpose of distributing Branham's teachings, which would take some of the burden off of his local congregation. Now, he died 5 months later, but the paperwork was in process and it was established in 1966. Around this time, Roy Border, one of his followers, started the spoken word publications for the sole purpose of printing the sermons of Brother Branham. Now, Joseph Branham in 1981, this is the youngest son of William Branham, started the Voice of God recordings. That year, they produced 2,200 tapes. 1986, Joseph Branham purchases the spoken word publications and combines them into one organization. By 2001, they were producing 500,000 tapes, 7 million books in 45 languages every year. Later, they got the website Branham.org, which I mentioned on part 1. Branham.org serves 2 million people worldwide. 52 offices are worldwide, almost half of which are in Africa, and 16 in Latin America. The Voice of God recording sends material to every country in the world, and that includes 195 million books, almost 8 million cassettes, and an uncountable amount of digital audio recordings. Now, let's back up to the early 1970s. Another organization. Ed Biscoe in British Columbia, Canada, knew William Branham and had a burden on his heart to get Branham's teachings to the world. So he starts a radio broadcast called the Bible Believers Broadcast. A church is started from this called Cloverdale Bible Way at BibleWay.org. In 1973, they start broadcasting. By 1981, they're broadcast on 27 radio stations covering almost all of the United States and Canada. They have a potential audience of 87 million in South Africa. By 2007, they started their website, messagehub.info. And there you can download over 1,200 of Branham's teachings on audio or transcripts. By November 2020, they had 81 languages on the website, 43,000 visitors, 21,000 audio downloads, over 206,000 book downloads for a total of over 3 million downloads to date. In 2014, the Bible Believers Broadcast started the Message mobile app. What's good about this app, if you're a researcher or a message believer, you go to this app, you open it, you can pull up the King James Version of the Bible, and there will be a number next to the verse. That number will represent how many times Branham spoke on that individual verse. And you can click that number, and it'll give you a short transcript of the sermon where he preached on that verse. By 2021, the Message mobile app has 34 languages. Next thing I want to talk to you about is Branham's Bibles. Branham obviously believed in the Bible. He preached from the Bible. However, it may surprise you to know that Branham said that there were 3 Bibles. He said the first Bible that God ever wrote was the zodiac in the sky. The zodiac was God's first Bible. And man could look up to realize his creator come from there. That's what God was teaching people through the zodiac, according to Branham. You could look up into the heavens, see the zodiac, and know that God came from there. In fact, Branham said God declared the whole Bible in the constellations of the zodiac. Now, he never goes into detail. How do you see the entire Bible in the zodiac? But once in a while, he will elaborate on some things. One thing that he did talk about often was, what does the zodiac start off with? The Virgin. What does it end with? Leo the Lion. the first coming of Christ and the second coming of Christ. So he believed that Virgo represented the Virgin Mary, the first coming of Christ, and Leo, the second coming. So you could look into the constellations and understand the timeline, according to Branham. So let me give you just a brief response about the zodiac. Now, Branham is right that you can sense that God exists or learn something of God through creation, but it's a limited thing that you can learn. For example, Romans 1:20 says, his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So you can learn some things of God or sense some things of God through the things that have been made. But everything that the Bible says cannot be seen in creation, in the stars, things like that. But still, it's one thing to say that through looking at the stars and the universe and the planets that you can learn of God. It's one thing to say that, and it's another thing to say that this can be sensed from the zodiac. You see, the zodiac is an occultic religious tool, and this tool is used by astrologers for the purpose of divination. And God clearly speaks against divination. In Deuteronomy chapter 18, starting around verse 10, it says, there shall not be found among you anyone practices divination or tells fortune, for whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord. God does not endorse divination. So it would be very curious to know why God would choose a zodiac to communicate to people, an occultic religious tool, when he's clearly condemned this. Another thing about the zodiac was Branham wasn't even right when he said that it begins with Virgo and it ends with Leo. That's not true. It begins with Aries and it ends with Pisces. So he didn't even get those facts right when he talked about God's first Bible. The second Bible, according to Branham, was written by Enoch and put in the pyramid. Now, when he says this, if you look at this statement here, you might think that he's saying that Enoch wrote on parchment and placed it inside the pyramid. That's not what he means. What he's saying is the actual structure of the pyramid itself is God's second Bible. Now, really quick, some context. If you were to look at this up on Voice of God recordings and do a search and look for when Branham talks about this, sometimes he'll say pyramids, plural, that were built. But his normal vein is to be talking about the Great Pyramid of Giza, the big pyramid. This is God's second Bible to us. So let me give you just some strange claims that Branham made about the Great Pyramid. Well, the first one we kind of already saw. He said that Enoch built the pyramid. Now, this is a little problematic. See, Enoch is from Genesis chapter 5, not Cain's son in chapter 4, but in chapter 5. He's probably talking about that Enoch. That Enoch probably lived 4,000 years BC. And that's a conservative estimate. It may have been more than that. 4,000 BC. Well, the Great Pyramid, they believe, was built in 2500 BC. So Branham was about 1,500 years off to say that Enoch built it. Another strange claim is Branham said the Egyptians had atomic power, and that's how they built the pyramids, because how in the world could they have moved these huge stones? He said they had atomic power. Not only did they have atomic power, this atomic power didn't work really well for them at one point. It caused a big explosion. Branham elaborates. He says the atomic power shook the world out of its orbit, away from the sun, throwed it sideways, and brought the rains and destroyed the world by water. In other words, Noah's flood was caused by the Egyptians using their atomic power. I'm not going to offer a response to that. That's for you. So, another strange claim about the pyramid. Branham said that the pyramid doesn't cast a shadow. Why wouldn't it cast a shadow? Well, he explains many times. Once he said, the pyramid is so perfect in the center of the earth no matter where the sun is, there's never a shadow around it. That doesn't even make any sense. Now, sometimes when he says things like this, he'll explain that it's the geographical, the pyramid is the geographical or the geometric center of the earth. And in Branham's day, that was the view that was held by scientists, that this was the geographical center of the earth. I'm not going to get into what that means, but from what I understand today, they don't believe this is where it was. It was in northern Turkey. But let's just give that to Branham and say, okay, this is the geographical center of the earth. Why wouldn't it cast a shadow? The only way it wouldn't cast a shadow is if the sun was always right above the pyramid. So his statement doesn't even make sense. If you look at any picture of the pyramid, like this one side is lighter than the other. The reason why that is because it's casting a shadow on itself. And not only that, if you look at the base of this picture, there's people standing in the shadow of the Great Pyramid of Giza. So the pyramid does cast a shadow. But anyway, the second Bible, according to Branham, what does it teach us? He elaborates on more things about the pyramid than with the zodiac. I'm just going to deal with one here because this is a big issue. He said the big pyramid of Egypt, it never had a top stone on it. Why? The capstone was rejected. Christ, the headstone, see, was rejected. And he said this is referring to the pyramid. Let me give a little response to this here. In this quote, there's two important words, capstone and headstone. He said this is referring to Christ. And we're going to look at the Bible and see where he's getting these words from. The capstone is a stone that is on pyramids. However, the Great Pyramid of Giza didn't have a stone. It was missing. And Branham's claim is this is the capstone, the headstone that was rejected by the builders. So that is a word used with pyramid. But what about the word headstone? Where does he get that? Psalm 118:22 is probably the source. Here it gives the prophecy about Christ who would be coming. It says, the stone which the builders refused is become the headstone of the corner. So what does it mean by the headstone of the corner? What's helpful is to look at how this is translated in other places. This was Psalm 118, verse 22 in the King James Version. If we look at Mark 12:10 in the New Testament, where it's using this verse, it translates it, it says the head of the corner. So it's the headstone of the corner or the head of the corner. Other translations like NIV, ESV say cornerstone, or the NAS and New King James say the chief cornerstone. What I believe this is talking about, this chief cornerstone or headstone, is not the top of the pyramid. It's not even the pyramid at all. But instead, the chief cornerstone is the first stone laid when a building is being made. So this first stone, this chief cornerstone, is on a corner, and its position determines the shape and the direction that the building is going to go. Everything is laid out according to it. It's not a top stone, the top of a building. It's instead the base. Now, I don't believe that just because I decided that sounds interesting, but if you go to Ephesians chapter 2, verse 20, it speaks about how Christians are built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets. Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone. Now, could that be talking about the top of a building or bottom? No, it's the bottom. The apostles and prophets are the foundation. The cornerstone is Christ, and that determines the direction of the building, which is the foundation by the apostles and prophets. And then Christians are the living stones built upon that. Yeah, the pyramid has 5 corners, and Branhamites, the message believers, might think of the top being the cornerstone, but no, it's a foundational stone, not a top stone. So going back to this, the Bible verses in King James translated as headstone, 2 words, which means something totally different than in the transcript of Branham where it says headstone. So headstone, from what we just looked at, is a foundation stone. It's on the bottom. What is a headstone? One word, headstone. Well, that's a grave marker. Something totally different from a capstone, from a cornerstone, chief cornerstone. Something totally different. Has nothing to do with the pyramid, has nothing to do with Christ in the Bible. What's interesting, though, is after Branham died in 1965, was later buried, and his headstone, his grave marker, was a pyramid. Now, what's interesting when you look at the Branham's gravestone, you can see there's words written on it, and this goes back to his teachings about the pyramid and what it reveals, which I'm not going to get into, but one thing I want to point out is on top there's an eagle. This is a very popular symbol within William Branham followers. And the reason why this is because Branham said everyone knows that a prophet is called the eagle in the Bible. And so this eagle is the symbol of a prophet put over his grave. Everyone knows that a prophet is called an eagle in the Bible. My response to that is no, it's not. No, there's no verse teaching us this. For more of a response, Great Pyramid of Giza is not the only one, not the only pyramid that didn't have a capstone on it. I was surprised to find there are over 100 pyramids found in Egypt, and many of them don't have capstones. And the reason why, it's theorized by some that they were looted. Many of these pyramids, people break in, they steal things. Some have theorized maybe they never were completed, although I think probably they were. But it's a mystery exactly what happened to the capstone here and others. But what's important to me as I look at pyramids and think about it is brings up the same kind of problem of the zodiac. It's the purpose that these pyramids were made. This comes from the ancient Egyptian religion. And they believed that these pyramids symbolized the mound that arose from the primordial waters of Nu, in which Atum Ra, the solar god, shaped the world. These pyramids were supposed to symbolize this, if you want to call it doctrine, of the ancient Egyptians. This is symbolizing creation from the solar god. Why would God use this as a second Bible? Why would he use a tool of divination in the zodiac to reveal things to people? That just seems very odd. Well, Branham's third Bible is the written Bible. And I'm not going to really get into this at all at this point. What we'll see is how he uses the Bible, and that'll be mainly in part 3 of this video series. So these are Branham's 3 Bibles: Zodiac, the Great Pyramid, and the written Bible. Now, the final section in this video, I want to talk about Branham's authority. He has a lot of authority in the lives of people who follow his teaching. Now, people who follow his teaching, they usually refer to him as Brother Branham. But more than that, these are some of his titles. He is a prophet. He is the second Elijah mentioned in Malachi 4, 5, and 6. He's the 7th angel messenger from Revelation 10:7, and he's the Laodicean messenger from Revelation 3:14. I'm going to describe what some of these are, but for the most part, a lot of these things are described in this book, an exposition of the 7 church ages. This book comes from a series of sermons from December of 1960, and then was published in this book form in 1965. This is often the first book that Branhamite followers will print and publish and disseminate throughout the world. And this book, we see a lot of these terms come out of it, other places as well. So in this book, Branham looks at Revelations chapter 2 and 3. And in these chapters of the Bible, there are 7 churches that God gives messages to. And these are those 7, and these are the chapter and verse references by each one of these. So for instance, chapter 2, verse 1, the Bible says, to the angel of the church of Ephesus, write. And then a message will be written to the church of Ephesus. And in this message, God might commend them for things they're doing well and rebuke them for things they're not doing well. So Branham looks at these 7 churches and said, these are actually not just churches, but these are periods of time in Christian history, starting from the New Testament times all the way up into the end at Laodicea. And as he did his study, he called them, these are church ages. And he gave the exact dates of when he believed these church ages existed. So Ephesus began in 53 AD and ended in 170. Another part of Branham's study, if you will, is when he looked at this verse, like take Ephesians again, the church at Ephesus, when it says, to the angel of the church of Ephesus, write, Branham correctly said that the word angel in the original Greek, angelos, could mean a human messenger. It doesn't have to mean a divine messenger like we think of an angel. It could be a human messenger. And he said that's exactly what these verses are about. So there is a human messenger for each one of these church ages. And in his findings, he listed these folks as the messengers for these different church ages, Paul, Irenaeus, Martin, and so forth. But you'll notice he didn't put anything down for Laodicea, the Laodicean messenger. But when you read his writings, if you listen to what he's saying, it's clear who he believes the Laodicean messenger is. It's him. And it's clear to the message believers, the followers of Branham, they believe he is the Laodicean messenger. Now, in this church age book, which that's what it's referred to oftentimes, and if I quote from this book, it'll say CAB, Church Age Book. They have a common drawing of this church age teaching that looks like this. So you can see the church age messengers on the top, the churches, and underneath that's probably small, but the years in which these guys were the messengers. So now let's think through this. What is the purpose of these messengers? Why is God having these messengers come, according to Branham? He said, God sent his prophet in every age where the people had strayed from divine order. God always sent his servant to these people in order to correct false teaching and to lead the people back to God. So messengers are here to tell people they've strayed, and this is how you get back on track. It's interesting how he uses the word prophet, divine order. God is sending these prophets in different church ages. But what is the message? What is the message that is being delivered to people to make them come back to the truth? When I was first doing my research on this, this is the big perplexing question that I was struggling with. Well, what is the message? So I would ask different people that had different backgrounds, and they all gave me different lists. Maybe it was the doctrine of God and the serpent seed, which, again, that'll be in another video. I'll get into these. Or maybe it's his view of women. Many different aspects might be the message. But as I have studied and researched this, I'm convinced that the message is far more than just these individual doctrines. 1964, Branham said, God in every age has had his Messiah. To reject Noah's message was to rejecting God. To reject Noah was to perish. To reject Moses was to perish. They were the anointed messiahs for that age. The person carrying the message is an anointed Messiah for that age. Doesn't mean Branham's claiming that he's Christ, but it does give him quite an exalted view of himself when we know what he's claiming later. So you can't accept most things that Moses said and reject Moses on other things. To do that was to perish. It was to reject God. You need to accept what the messenger says. Not just some parts. I'm thinking he's talking about all parts. And you may wonder, well, can we look at maybe what did the other messengers say? Maybe that would be good. We don't need the Laodicean messenger because we've had 6 other messengers. Can we listen to them? Not according to Branham. He said, you can't hold to them old things that the other church before you did. You've got to take the message of the hour. Then you either receive that or reject it. You don't go back to the old messengers in the old church age. You need to go with the message of the hour. And this is the popular buzzword, the message of the hour. And this is why they're called message followers, because Branham is teaching the message. So what is the message? The question we ask, what's what Branham says. You can't divide things up and say, I agree with this part, I don't agree with that part. Now, of course, like the Bible, he may speak of things that are more important than other things. If he's talking about an individual that he healed, perhaps, well, that's one thing. But when he speaks about who God is and what salvation is and all these other things, you need to believe the entire thing. In fact, at one point in 1964, he referred to the message as the expressed thoughts of Jehovah. That's what the message is, and Branhamites believe he is the message teacher. One last one on this subject, 1962, he gives a chilling elaboration of this. He says, God was the messenger at the beginning. See, there was actually church ages before the Ephesus one, but this was the Jewish church ages in the Old Testament, is what Branham would call it. And so in this Jewish church age, God was the messenger at the beginning to tell Adam and Eve, you shall eat this, but you shall not do this. That was the message. And when men stepped across the message of the hour, he brought death and chaos to the whole human race. Now, that's how much the message means. If you go against the message, terrible chaos, catastrophe, you need to believe and follow what the message teaches. So how did Branham come up with all this? Of the dates and the messengers. How did he do this? Well, according to him, in the Church Age book, in chapter 4, he talks about how it was through study and revelation. He studied these things out. He's looked at church history to figure out who would be the best one who looked like that they were the messenger. He studied these out and he sought the Spirit of God. He said, it was only with the definite approval of the Spirit of God that I have chosen the men that I have. So these were confirmed to him by God that he's chosen the right ones. Now he said that Paul was the first messenger to the church at Ephesus. And he said that the other messengers would need to follow Paul's pattern. And he gave 3 things of the pattern that Paul made for everyone else to follow. First, he was true to the word. He taught and preached according to the word of God. Of course, he wrote most of the New Testament, so that would be easy to say of him. But also, the church messengers would need to come with the power of the Spirit. And what he means by that is power in the proclamation of his word, very confident, strong preaching. But it also refers to healing and miracles. Does that sound familiar of who he might be talking about? And also the third category that he's looking at in these patterns would be fruit. And by that, he means that this messenger cared about his people. A movement would start from that because he nurtures and teaches and brings it forth out of here. So these were the requirements to be any of the first church age messengers. The Laodicean messenger has other criteria that Branham found in the Bible, supposedly. Would need to be a prophet to be the Laodicean messenger, and specifically the prophet from Revelation chapter 10, verse 7. Now, in video 1, we talked at length about the 1963 cloud in Arizona. I don't know if I elaborate on it. The purpose of this cloud was to commission Branham to go back to his church and open the 7 seals. Branham is supposedly the prophet from Revelation chapter 10, verse 7. So when he's saying in the Church Age book that you have to be the prophet of Revelation 10:7, followers of Branham, they know exactly what this means. That means him. At this point, it's already revealed to them that he is this prophet. The Laodicean messenger would also need to be Elijah. Now, if you know your Bible, you're probably thinking, well, didn't Elijah already come and John the Baptist? Well, yeah, but there's two Elijahs. First of all, let's look at Malachi 4. Chapter 4, verse 5 says, "Behold, I will send you Elijah, the prophet, before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes," which Branham would see that as the end times. Elijah is going to come, and he will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of their children to their fathers. And he likes to throw in there the word to clarify to the Pentecostal fathers. This is Branham's role as the second Elijah, to turn people back to God in the way he understands God. Again, video 3 when it comes. Matthew chapter 17 is where they get the idea of there being more than one Elijah. Chapter 17, verse 11, "Elijah does come and he will restore all things. But I tell you," this is Jesus speaking, "I tell you that Elijah has already come and they did not recognize him." So the two Elijahs that they say is here is, well, in verse 12, it says that Elijah has already come, and that would be John the Baptist. But verse 11 says that Elijah does come. That's future tense. Jesus is speaking future of Elijah that is going to come. And verse 12, talking about Elijah that has already come. So they would conclude, you see, there's more than one Elijah. One that came in John the Baptist and one that's going to come ends up being William Branham. However, I don't think that's what's going on in Matthew 17. The whole context of this is the disciples ask Jesus, they say, then why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come? They're asking, look, these scribes are saying Elijah must come before the Messiah. And so in verse 11, Jesus is answering their questions. He's saying, you're right. And they're right. Elijah must come. But I'm telling you, he has already come. He's not saying there's two Elijahs. That's not answering their question. Elijah has already come, and the scribes are right. Elijah has to come first, and he has come. The third requirement for the Laodicean messenger is that he would have to be like Elijah and John the Baptist. And what were they like? See if this list sounds like anyone you might have heard of. Both were men of the wilderness. Both lashed out against the religious leaders. Both prophesied much against immoral women and their ways. Though I haven't gone into the Branham's preaching about women. This is textbook William Branham. So his description of the Laodicean messenger fits him. So let's give some response to this church age message teaching. First of all, there's some problems with this list. Let me first point to Columba. Columba died in 597 AD. That was 9 years before the church age started. How could he have been dead during his church age? Everybody else, all the other church age messengers, lived in their own church ages, and it only makes sense for them to be the messenger of that church age, to be alive during that church age. How could Columba be a church age messenger when he wasn't alive during his church age? That's one problem. Another one here is, let's look at Martin Luther, the messenger to Sardis. One of the requirements that I had mentioned from William Branham was miracles. What miracles did Luther do? In fact, Branham had said many times that Martin Luther did miracles. But no, he didn't. In fact, the Roman Catholics have argued, some Roman Catholics have argued that Luther couldn't have been called to do what he did because he's not a saint and saints have to do miracles. But Martin Luther never claimed to be a saint in the Roman Catholic sense. So that argument is invalid, but it's interesting that the Roman Catholics argue against Luther, saying that he didn't do any miracles. But now Branham is claiming that he has done miracles, and that's what helps qualify him to be a church age messenger. That's problematic. But also, what were the messengers supposed to do? Remember, they're supposed to draw people back from falsehood and teach them truth. And you're supposed to believe everything they teach. These guys didn't teach what Branham teaches, especially the doctrine of the Trinity. Now, I'm sure message believers would love to argue with us about, did Paul really teach the Trinity or not? But let's just look at Luther and Wesley. Let's go to Branham himself and see what he said. This is before he was teaching the church age doctrine. In 1957, he said, Martin Luther taught the Trinity with a lot of other Catholicism that's in the Lutheran Church. Wesley followed on with it, and it's still going on, but it's an error. It's not the truth. Never was it a Bible doctrine. Back in 1957, he acknowledges that Luther and Wesley, both church age messengers is what they believe now, but both these guys were teaching this Trinity. It's an error. How could they be church age messengers? People were required to believe what they said. Rejection of them would be rejection of God. Doesn't make any sense. The next problem is Branham claimed that he came to all this information from the study of the Bible, study of history, and put it together, and it was confirmed by God. However, that is most likely untrue. Let me introduce you to Clarence Larkin. This man was born in 1850 and died in 1924. Clarence Larkin did his study and wrote these two books, Dispensational Truth and the Book of Revelation. In 1918 and 1919, he published these two books. And in these books, he looks at the Revelation chapter 2 and 3, and he believes that these are church ages, not just actual churches. And he provides these dates as when he believed these church ages were. Does this look familiar? This list is almost exactly what Branham put out. Now, there is a difference. Clarence Larkin didn't have church age messengers. He didn't teach that part. This came by Branham afterwards. However, Branham's is almost identical, which kind of makes it look suspect. There's only two dates on this that were different. He said instead of 70 AD, the Ephesus church age started in 53 AD. And the Philadelphia church age didn't end in 1900. Instead, it was 1906. And that was the beginning of the Laodicea church age, right after the Azusa Street revivals. This is close, so close of a connection with these dates. I think it makes it highly suspect that Branham actually came up with this on his own. So what is going on in Revelation chapter 2 and 3? Now, Branham may acknowledge that these were actual churches, but I believe that that's what they were and that's all they were. They didn't represent periods in Christian history. These are messages from God to these different churches. But just because these messages are to them doesn't mean that they're not useful for everyone else. Also, they're very helpful and beneficial. They're for Christians in all times. We can learn from what God was saying to them. For example, the church in Ephesus. In chapter 2, God gives them a rebuke. It says that they abandoned their first love and they need to repent. That's important for all Christians to know in all times. He doesn't go into detail about how they abandoned their first love. I don't know, maybe it was they got too focused on doctrine and didn't think about the God that doctrine represented. I don't know. But they abandoned their first love. We as Christians need to remember that and be encouraged by that and think about how it's God that we love, not just facts about Him. But to the Ephesian church, there's also positive things said about them. In verse 2 of chapter 2, they're commended for testing men who call themselves apostles who actually were false apostles. And God is commending them. They're doing a good job of that. And that's definitely something that people need to be aware of today. There are false apostles out there. There's false prophets out there. There's false teachers. As I talk about William Branham, if you are a message believer, I hope that you'd be open to listen to what I have said just in video 1 and 2 already and the rest of the series. There are serious things going on here that should make us question whether this man was called of God to teach the things that he did.